This is the podcast overview for the objectives that go with Chapter 13, Chronic Illness. So the beginning of the chapter is really setting the stage for an understanding of what it's like for a person to adjust to a chronic illness. So it's going to cover what people's reactions are to having a chronic condition, so getting that news from their doctor and whatever lifestyle changes it requires them to make to manage the condition. We learned about the different stages of prevention, right? Primary, secondary, and tertiary. Once you have a chronic condition, you're either in secondary or tertiary stages of prevention. So really preventing it from getting worse or leading to mortality, right? Or morbidity. So people react very differently to this, and we'll take a look at that, and then how they in turn cope with it, right? So anytime a person's going through a health crisis, whether that be news that they have a particular health condition or their body has already failed them, i.e. a heart attack or stroke or something of that nature, how does one cope? So this will build off of the previous coping literature that we've looked at earlier in the semester when we talked about coping with stress. A health crisis is a stressor, right? So we'll specifically look at that and what that coping process is like, not just for the patient, but also for the family, because oftentimes the whole family is affected by the chronic illness of one of its members. Oftentimes this requires role reversals in marriages. It requires grown children or sometimes even teen children to step up and take care of parents and do things that are stressful and beyond sort of what their coping capacity might be. So that process of coping can be really tough and really hard on families. We'll then turn to looking at the impact of various types of chronic conditions. So once you have an overall understanding of what a chronic condition is and how it can affect people, we'll look at, well, what specifically are some of the, so to speak, heavy hitters of chronic health conditions. So we'll look at asthma, specifically what it is, its physiology, causes, the effects of it, what a medical regimen looks like for an asthmatic, like what do they have to do on a daily basis, as well as some psychosocial factors that play a large role in asthma. Once we've covered asthma, we'll take a look at epilepsy, nervous system injuries, diabetes, and arthritis. And some of these have already been talked about a little bit in previous chapters. I know we discussed diabetes when we were covering some of the physiological systems of the body. Diabetes was talked about when we covered the chapter on nutrition and eating. So some of this, may seem like a build off of what you've learned earlier. So just make sure you're able to outline and identify the major tenets of each of these chronic conditions, how they're affecting people, who they're affecting mostly, and what it is like for a person with that chronic condition. Maybe what are some important considerations that people need to be aware of when they're having or living with one of these conditions. Make sure that you understand sort of the intricacies of how these operate on the individual as well as psychosocially, so how it affects families and communities and things of that nature. And then the third part of the chapter, we will turn to looking at what the psychosocial interventions are existing for people who have chronic conditions. How can they get help? And what does that help look like? Sorry for the formatting here. It looks a little funky, but basically you'll be looking at factors influencing one's adjustment to a chronic condition. How do people adjust? What can influence that? We typically look at individual factors, community factors, as well as family factors. We'll look at educational, social support, and different behavioral methods for intervention. So there are interventions targeted at educating people about chronic conditions. There are interventions that are targeted at increasing social support for people with chronic conditions. And then there are behavioral methods that these are things people can be doing to increase their coping ability with a chronic condition. We'll also look at relaxation and biofeedback techniques in therapy, treatment, different cognitive methods, as well as interpersonal and family therapy. And then we will land on the collaborative or integrative care approaches, which really take into consideration multiple methods for intervention. So several of these different modes of intervention would be included in an integrative care approach or a collaborative care approach to helping those with chronic conditions. And that will wrap it up for Chapter 13 material.